Okay, good morning. I'm just watching how these handouts are going. Looks like we're getting a bit thin. Has everyone got a copy? I know you haven't. Yeah, I think they're coming along. Okay, there's one needed at the front there. Is there a spare one? Okay, good morning to you all. I'm not sure if you've had any. Is this the first lecture you've had in this module? Yeah, okay. It's quite a complicated timetable, and I'm not even sure of all the details of it myself. But I will be lecturing to you once a week in this slot. Okay, so I'll be lecturing to you every week in this slot, thinking about research skills, and we'll explore what I mean by that in a moment. Professor John Mangan, who is doing commercial skills with you, he will be doing something similar. He doesn't start for the first couple of weeks because there's quite a lot of intensive other activity going on. So you will see that his slot picks up in 2 weeks' time, maybe 3 weeks' time, I'm not sure. And I know that you've got some other things going on in this module as well. But as far as I'm concerned, I've got a very clear set of lectures, about 8 or 9 lectures that I'm going to give you over this term. There are a couple of weeks when I'm not in Newcastle, but I'll give you plenty of warning when the lecture is going, if the lecture is going to be cancelled for any reason. But essentially, this slot every week is going to be me talking to you about research skills. Okay. I've met some of you already, but for those who I haven't, Richard Berman, Professor of Smallcraft Design, essentially a naval architect, but have done a lot of research over the years, so this is really drawing on the process of doing research and what we have to think about when we're doing research. It is relevant to all of you, of course. On the MSc programme, all of you have got a substantial project to do as part of this. It maybe depends slightly on which of the programmes you're actually attached to, but some of you have got 80 credits, some of you have got 60 credits is going to be done on research projects. That's either a third or almost a half of your year is going to be spent developing your own piece of work, sort of a self-directed study coming out with a project at the end of it. Now that is intended to be a research activity that you're doing, and it will be concluded in August of next year, so there's many months to go. Although on the timetable it's down as, I think it's only down as 10 credits this semester, 50 credits the last semester, the third semester maybe, I'm not sure. I do recommend that you start thinking about it sooner rather than later. Don't leave it although it's sort of loaded on the timetable towards the end of the year. I do recommend that you really get moving on it sooner rather than later. That's not my responsibility. Someone else is going to look after the research project with you, but I'm just sort of feeding that in. It's a good idea to start thinking about that soon. But what I'm doing here is sort of a little bit of supportive of that, if you like. So, I mean, it's much wider than that. It's thinking about research in a much wider way. But it does support that activity of your own research for the project, in that it's sort of giving you some understanding of what that process is about. Okay, all good? What we're thinking about these interactions in the research process, but let's just look at the lectures that this is the lectures I'm going to do, the topics I'm going to cover in this semester, and we'll be starting today with these interactions. What are the partnerships that we find in research, and what are the interactions that go on between them? Next time we meet next week, we'll think about the project proposal. This is the starting point for research. What is it we're going to do, the proposal, and who do we have to persuade in order to achieve it? I'll have a little think about research ethics. Okay, what we mean by researching ethically. Okay, so how to make sure that, and you can, if you fall foul of that, the most obvious way to fall foul of it is through plagiarism. But if you fall foul of that, all your work is wasted because your work will be thrown out. I'll then think about how we monitor the progress of research. Okay, so when you're doing research, someone probably who's paying for it. I mean, all of this is set in the context of larger projects than your individual project, but you will see that there is relevance all the way through to what you're doing on your individual projects. But there's always some monitoring going on. In your case, it'll be a supervisor, not least. So we'll think about what that monitoring process is, what the nature of reports might be, what happens in meetings to monitor progress. We'll then move on to the end of the research process, which is where we think about disseminating the results. How do we pass this new information that we've created out into the wider community? And we'll think about papers, reports, theses, dissertations in your case, which are slightly different, and so we'll think about these. And there's a little bit right at the end I do, which is thinking about when you're actually down to trying to write your report, your dissertation, but it applies even before that to other bits of coursework you do, how to go about that and how to get it right. So I actually come down to some very practical, right at the end there, some very practical things about how do you start writing. How do you start when you're sitting there thinking, oh, I've got to write a paper, and all of us feel, how do I start this? So I'm going to give you some practical ideas, techniques to enable you to do that. Yes, if there is a reference for this, there's a book called Research Methods by Tony Greenfield. Okay, so if you want to, some of the material that I'm providing for you here has come from that, not all of it, but some of it has come from that. If you're wanting to do some reading around this area, there's a reference that you could go to. I mean, as far as I'm providing what I think you need in these lectures, and there will be a question, is it more than one question from, I think it is more than one question from these lectures that I'm giving you in the exam. So I will only question you on materials I've delivered in these lectures. So as long as you come to the lectures, you will have what you need for the exam. But if you're interested and want to do wider reading, here's a reference that you could work with. There's probably an updated version. It's probably been had second and third edition since that date, actually. Right, let's start today. Unless there's any questions about just that overview of where we're going in this term of me. Everyone happy? Yeah. Okay, let's start off with this partnerships and interactions then. Let's think about what I'm going to talk about now, today. Okay, so I'm going to think about why we do research. Okay, what's the rationale for doing research? We'll think about who are the people who are involved in research. Okay, so who are the participants who are involved in this. We'll think about the different types of research that we might be engaged in, and then we'll move on to look at, okay, there are these different people involved, what are the ways that they interact with each other? And I'll put up a diagram at that stage, which actually I use as a sort of guide through the other lectures. I sort of point where we are in that diagram. The starting point for research is the project proposal, so I will look at why that is so important, though next week's topic is really thinking about the project proposal. Okay, so it'll just be a lead-in to what we'll do next week. Okay, so what we want to do is make sure that you understand research in this widest context, okay, that you have a picture of the framework within which we do research, so you have that understanding, and also that you're aware of who are the people who might be involved, okay, who are the participants who might be involved in research, and with that then an understanding of and what are their roles, what are their responsibilities, how do they interact with each other during the research process. Right, let's start off by thinking about why we do research. Okay, so what's the rationale for doing research? We have to have money in order to do it, and if we've got money, then we can do research. I say we have to have money. You may think, well, you're going to do your dissertation, where's the money? Well, the money is, your time. Okay, that someone is, even if it's yourself, is paying for you to spend so many months working on this particular project. In a bigger context, if I have a piece of research I want to do, I'll try and find someone to give me money in order to pay someone to put the time into it. It could be one of you next year, perhaps, and so on. Okay, so we need money we need resources in order to do research. The end product of that research is new knowledge, and that's why we call it research. We're exploring, we're digging in, we're discovering, and we're trying to find new knowledge. Okay, it is only research if that's the objective, is to get new knowledge at the end of the day. All right, something that no one has realised before, no one knew before. Okay, so we're trying to get, and research is all about extending the frontiers of human knowledge. Okay, we have this scientific body, it's not just scientific engineering, all sorts of types of knowledge. We have this body of knowledge, and as we do research, we're extending that frontier and stretching it out a little bit further and further. So when we do research, we're trying to extend that frontier and create new knowledge. What do we do with that new knowledge? Well, it depends on, in a way, who's invested into this. But it could be, if it's a company or an industry, that new knowledge is going to enable them to make more money. That's why they did it. That new knowledge is going to enable them to be more profitable. Okay, so that new knowledge might be a new material that it could be used, but it might be just a new process for manufacturing something. They do the research to find what's the new process that will do this more economically, make more profit. Okay, so that's one of the reasons we do it, but it needn't be that. It could be for improved planning, enable us to organise ourselves better, and so on. So these are the sort of things that leads to. That's why we're doing it, really. We're not doing new knowledge just for its own sake. Some people would say they do, but at the end of the day, it's hopefully going to improve the world in some way. Of course, just having money isn't enough. You know, if you say, I've got money, I want to do research, well, you're then going to have to look around and go, what am I going to do research in? Okay, I need a problem that I'm going to address. Some area that people are going, we don't understand this properly, we need to understand it better. And quite often, whether it starts with the problem or starts with the money, depends on all sorts of things. I mean, usually it's really, there's a problem first, and then we look for the money to deal with it. But we have to have a problem as well as money in order to a problem which we're going to address in that research. There's also, what are the outputs? The outputs aren't necessarily financial outputs, okay? We do need to have money to do the research to create new knowledge. And if it's industry, then the purpose of that is clearly in order to make more money. That's why the commercial incentive is in that one. But there are other people who provide the money, perhaps government, or perhaps an NGO, a non-governmental organisation, or a charity, and they're providing the money to do the research, to get new knowledge, not in order to make more money, but in order to improve humankind's lot, okay, in order to make our quality of life better. So a lot of medical research we could think of goes into that category. It's not just, you know, if the government is doing something and they're worried about pollution in the streets, and so they put money into how to make cars less polluting, you know, that's not in order to make more money, that's in order to make the quality of life in our streets better. Of course, if VW or BMW or someone put the money in, they might be looking to solve the same problem, but they're doing it in order to make more money. So the incentive, the reason might be, we've got different reasons, different outcomes that we're going to get from this. And it's not always driven by the profit motive. It can be just driven by a much more altruistic motive to improve the quality of life. There is one other reason, and this is, why do I do research? Okay? And those of you that finish here and go on and do research, why stay in the university and do research alongside me and my colleagues? Why do we do research? And if I do research, it's very unlikely that I'm going to get money out of it. Occasionally we do a piece of work and we develop a spin-off company and we go and become a director of that company. Yes, it does become a way to create a better standard of living for me personally, but that's not usually what happens. I get my salary anyway, and I still do research, good or bad, I still get my salary. So what's driving me to do research? Okay, and all right, it might be, well, I want to make the world a better place. It's true, that might be part of it. You know, that probably is, certainly in my case, with many of us, that is part of it. Yes, we'd like to do things that are going to make a difference. But quite an important driver is this matter of esteem and reputation. If I want to get promoted, the only way I'm going to do that is by actually doing good quality research. So the driver is this esteem, this raise my reputation, raise my profile. And if you think about it, why are you going to do research? Why are you going to do a dissertation? It's because you want an MSc at the end of the year. And to get that MSc, you've got to do it, and that MSc is going to raise your reputation and your level of self-esteem and so on. So there is actually another driver for doing research, which is simply is that one about raising your reputation, your sense of self-worth, and so on. So that's so if you like, these are the reasons down the bottom there are the reasons that we do research: for profit, to improve the quality of life, or in order to raise our personal reputation. Or even the institutional one. The university is very keen that we all do research, because that's how the university is measured. What quality of what standard is this university acting at? And a lot of that comes out of the research we're doing. Okay, so that's why we do it. Let's think about who's involved in this process. So there are two things. We said it started off by money. So we need someone to provide that resource. Okay, so someone needs to turn around and say, yes, I will give you the resources you need, which is essentially money. And so these are the funding bodies. Okay, the people who pay the money are not, sometimes they also do the research, but very often not. The funding bodies are people who say, we've got money, we're going to pay for this research to be done. Who are these? Well, sometimes it is individuals who are going to do it. Okay, you're not going to be paid to do this dissertation later in the year, so you are funding yourself, so you are funding the research yourself. So sometimes some of the research is done through individuals, self-funding. But there are also charitable trusts and NGOs. A lot of medical research is not entirely, but we do have government money going into medical research, but there's a lot of money comes from the Wellcome Trust and things like that. So a lot of I'm at the moment, my big project at the moment is working with the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. So this is the search and rescue craft around the British coast. So it's a charity. So they're providing the money to do research with us. So those sort of organisations, non-governmental organisations, NGOs, okay, so whether it's Greenpeace or those sort of bodies that are doing work all around the world and so on, they do pay for people to do research. Then, of course, there's the government. The government provides money, things that it thinks society needs to change and so on. So they do that. And beyond that, there's the international agencies. The European Union is a new point at the moment, I know, but the European Union has major research projects which are done on an international basis and so on. So there are these large international organisations that go for research. I guess actually missing off that, of course, is also industry. It's perhaps not there, so industry is another one we should have on that. Industry often does its own research, okay, so it produces the money and it has its own research body or unit which does the research, but we should maybe have them up there as well. So that's one side of it, the people are providing the money, and then the other side of it are the people who are going to solve the problem. Okay, we've identified this problem, you've given us the money, so we will now set to and actually resolve the problem. So these are the people who are doing the research. This is universities. All the academics in universities like to be research active, but there are commercial research organisations which are either a unit which is just dedicated to research and is pulling money in from industry and from government in order to do research. There are also commercial research units with inside industries, I just mentioned, and so on. So, and in that case, industry itself is doing it. So we've got these possible organisations that are going to actually solve the problem. Let's think about each of these in turn. Let's think about the funding bodies. If we're thinking about funding an individual, a single person, well, it might be private income. As I say, if you're self-funding, then it's your own income or your parents' income that is going towards this. There are charitable foundations, and including the university, who provide scholarships. Okay, so if someone's a PhD is a piece of research, who's paying for that piece of research? Well, it might be the student himself. It might be the university says, well, we've got a pot of money that we're going to pay for so many PhDs. It might be, as I say, charitable foundations and so on might go for that. And interestingly, about that is, sorry, I'll just pop back to that one. Sometimes, or some of the reason for that, when the government pays money to do PhDs, it's not always in order to particularly solve a specific problem. Part of it is in order to build a body of trained researchers. So just like with you, you're going to do your dissertation. It's partly, you want to find a problem that interests you, that you have to find a new problem. You can't just do something that's been done before. It has to be new knowledge that you create. So you're going to find a problem that interests you, or maybe interests your employer and so on. But the other reason you do it is it's training you how to do research. Okay, you're learning what is the research process, how do I do it? In order, because in many parts of industry, there's a lot of research comes into a lot of activities that we do. You may not actually be a researcher when you go out into industry, but you may be commissioning research. You may be looking at the partial results of research that someone else is doing and guiding them on what you want out of it and so on. So this is part of training. So often these individuals, it's in order to train you about what the research process is and how to do it. If, on the other hand, it's really a very specific problem that we're trying to address, so we've got a specific problem, producing these artifacts, whatever they are, these bottles, these whatever, is costing too much. We must find a cheaper way to do it. Okay, there's a problem to solve. So we have too much pollution in our streets. There's a problem to solve. We have too much CO2 going into the atmosphere. There's a problem to solve. Okay, so where we're looking to problem solving, then we can look to, then we have these larger organisations will come in. Industry itself, the charitable foundations again, the non-governmental organisations, government, these Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council, is EPSRC, Natural Environment Research Council, NERC and so on. Department for International Development is the last one. So different parts of government will put forward money to solve particular problems. What we do get is, this is sort of a project which has got a very specific target, is that middle one. The last one here is where we have a much bigger programme, and this tends to be, the government sometimes sponsors these, the international agencies do. You know, the international agency like the European Union will sort of, yes, it is a problem, but their problem will be, how are we going to get traffic? How are we going to get goods and people off the roads? We want to use the railways and the sea lanes more, and partly for reasons of congestion, partly for reasons of reducing CO2 and so on. So they've got this policy objective, and they will set up a programme, a mammoth programme, which is looking at many different ways to encourage goods and people to not use the roads but to use other modes of transport. And they will put many millions of euros into that, and it'll spawn a whole number of projects. It won't just be one project. It'll be all under this overarching programme, but there'll be a lot of different projects that have been done addressing individual parcels and so on. So we can have these huge research programmes which are funded to the tune of 10, 15, 20, even more million euros, okay, to try and address these issues. And let's think about the other side of it. Let's think about the researchers. The researchers are not, we don't just sit there and go, right, give me the money and I'll do it. For the partnership to be successful, we have to also come to the table with things to offer, with resources to offer. First of all is our expertise. I can't just say, I'm a researcher, what do you want me to do? I've got to say, I'm a researcher who has expertise in design for safety, in design for sustainability, in stability and so on. I have expertise in fishing vessels and in tugs and things like that. So if you want a problem solved in that area, I'm the person to deal with it. Okay, so I'm bringing my expertise to the solving the problem. The researchers or the research organisation is expected to have well-found laboratories, testing equipment, field stations and so on. The funding body who want the problem solved, they wouldn't come and say if you didn't have appropriate laboratories and so on. Yes, they're happy to pay the overheads to keep those laboratories going and so on. They're happy to pay the fuel for the research vessel to go out to sea and things like that, and pay for the crew, but they expect us to have the boat. They're not going to say, oh, you need a boat? Well, we'll buy you one. Okay, so we're expected to have the appropriate equipment and infrastructure. We may bring to it, not always, but we may bring data from previous research that we've done. Okay, so we may already have a data set that will be part of contribute to the success of the research project. And then we will also be expected to be able to do this real-world validation of the research, which is where, like the research vessel comes in, we can actually go out and demonstrate that this is really going to work. Okay, so the partnership has got to bring together, yes, the people with the money and the problem. That needs to come together with people who have the resource, the facilities, the equipment, the knowledge, the expertise to actually solve that problem. So it has got to be a partnership, which is why the people who have the money and want a problem solved, they don't just, they might, either they go to people they already know who have the reputation, or they will put out a call. They'll say, right, we want someone to solve this problem. Come and persuade us that you're the person who can do it. And we'll look at that in more detail next week. Okay, so let's just think about the types of research that can be done. There is a range, a spectrum of research of different types that we can go through. And these two words, blue sky and near market, if you like, at the opposite end, the two ends of this spectrum. So we can think about blue sky and near market as extremes, if you like. Most research is not done at those extremes. Most of research is done somewhere in the middle, a bit more towards the blue sky perhaps, or a bit more towards the near market, but it's somewhere in the middle. So although we can define these sort of limits, it's not, as I say, usually we're not involved in one or the other. We're involved in something between these two, even though it might tend to be more towards one end than the other. So blue sky research is the phrase we use when we're talking about research, that we're just doing it because we're curious. Okay? We can't actually see what use it's going to be. We just wonder why something behaves the way it does. We just wonder, what would happen if we heat this up to a certain temperature or whatever. So it's just done out of curiosity, and it is really not clear what the benefit of this is going to be. As a result, of course, it's quite difficult to get funding for. This tends to be, it's not so much in the engineering world that we do blue sky research. Blue sky research tends to be done in the scientific field, astrophysicists and people like that and so on. They're just wondering what on earth is going on out there so many million light years away and why it's happening. And there's no obvious benefit to society, but it's curiosity driven is what it's all about. And to gain new knowledge. The fact is that it is speculative. We gain that new knowledge, and without knowing what use it's going to be, what benefit it's going to be, and some of it, doesn't even when we've discovered the new knowledge, there's still no obvious benefit. Oh, that's how it works. That's why it's like that. So what? And there's nothing obvious out of it. But in the longer period, the new knowledge, this taking forward this frontier of knowledge for humankind, in the longer term, that new knowledge, perhaps combined with other new knowledge that's also done on a speculative basis, leads to the really big changes and the really big development. It's that blue sky research that actually makes the major leaps, if you like, eventually, but it's over a very long time frame. And the people who put in the money, who pay for it, may never, there may not be a comeback for them, an increased profit for them, but humankind does benefit. I'm just trying to, that's the nature of, that's what we mean by blue sky research. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, we've got near market research. So this is where we can say, well, we can absolutely see why we're doing this and what we're doing it for. This idea of, well, if only we could produce, we're losing market share because other people are packaging their products much more cheaply than we are. We need to find a cheaper way to package our product. And so it's a very direct problem. If we can reduce the cost of this packaging by 20%, we can win back that market share. So it's a very direct problem. If we solve it, we know what we're going to do with it, and we know what the benefit is going to be. So that's what we call a near market. We can see how it's going to be exploited immediately. Before we start, we can see how we're going to exploit this. And of course, this has very clear, because you can see what the outcome is going to be and what the benefits are going to be, you can see how you're going to make money out of it. And so that's the profit motive will drive that research very easily. And so government doesn't really like getting involved in near market research. Well, if it's going to be so beneficial, why isn't industry paying for it? They're going to make the money out of it. Let them put in the money and make the money. Yes, we want to see it happen, but why should the government put in the money? So near market research tends to be funded by industry, those who can see the benefit and are going to get it immediately. Industry doesn't like putting into blue sky research because they go, well, we put all these millions of pounds, dollars, euros into this interesting little phenomenon, but how are we going to get any money out of it at the end of the day? So industry is allergic to the blue sky research, which is where government is not always keen to put its money because it likes to see what the benefit is going to be, but more likely to be funded by government, whereas the near market is funded by industry. Now, as I say, that's the two extremes. Actually, we're usually somewhere between that. If you pull back from the real blue sky bit, you can say, well, it's pretty remote, but we can sort of see how we might be able to, this might benefit us. So you come back a little bit. If you're the near market, if you move away from that a bit, you go to, well, we know that it would help if our packaging was cheaper, but actually we're doing quite well at the moment, but if we could see what we're going to do in 5 years' time, that might be of benefit and so on. So you can move away a little bit away from the near market. Okay. Okay, we can have it anywhere between these two extremes. So who's going to benefit from the research and the partnerships that we make up? So there's all sorts of people benefit from this. The individual who's doing the work, as I said, one of the motivations for research is to build up my own esteem, build up my reputation for you, to get your MSc, to build up your value to society so you can earn more money, and so on. So clearly there's a direct benefit to those who are actually doing the research. Okay, so the researchers. I mentioned this thing, research clubs. Research clubs are quite interesting. Research clubs are where you actually go around and you say, well, we know there's an interesting problem area here. Stability of tugs or something. So it would be good if we can do just get a more fundamental understanding of how the stability problem associated with tugs. Okay. Now there's no obvious benefit going to come out of that, but we'd all be better off if we could understand the stability problem better and so on. So this is where it's moving more towards blue sky. Okay, it's not absolutely, but it's sort of going, well, we can't see, but we know it would be good if we knew more, even though there's no obvious benefit. So industry is likely to respond to that saying, yeah, I agree, it would be good if we knew that, but we're not going to make money out of it. How are we going to make a profit out of this? And so what sometimes is done then is you set up a research club and you go around to a number of interested industrial partners and you say, look, if you put in 10,000 and you put in 10,000, 10,000 is nothing to you, it's a quarter of the person you're talking to, or a tenth of your salary. For your organisation, this is nothing. But if you all put in, if we get 5 or 6 or 10 organisations to put in 10,000, you can all have the results. It's not right at the cutting edge, so there's no sort of worry about, oh, my competitors are going to win in the way I'm not. You're all going to get the results. It doesn't cost much, but we, the researchers, now have 100,000. I can pay for a PhD out of that. I can do 3 years' work, and we can explore the stability of tugs out of that. Okay, so it's a way to it's an interesting way to actually push that relationship a bit, so that we can get people who wouldn't normally pay for this sort of curiosity-driven research. We can push them in that direction a bit more. So in that way, as I say, the result comes out. It comes back to the people who paid for it very directly. Blue sky research eventually benefits society. Okay, the money that's spent in that eventually does come back and is why society does move on and why we're where we are now. But it is a long time scale that we have to look at. The funding body are the people who really obviously benefit from industrial research and development. When we do research like that, the people who put in the money, they can see how they're going to get out of it and get the results. And often they'll be very protective about that. I say the research clubs are an interesting way of getting a group of industrial partners who normally fight with each other and are competing to actually work together. Normally industry puts the money in and they're really cagey about letting you publish the results. They want it anonymised, they want it in a way that their competitors can't actually use it. They want to get the benefit of the money they've put in, they want to make the profit, they don't want to just give away the results. And so there's a little bit of a tension there, because we researchers would like other people to know what a great job we've done. So we're wanting to publish it. And sometimes the industry partners are going, oh, I'm not sure about that. And so there's a bit of a tension in there. Again, this is trying to sort of put it down fairly clearly, but it's not as... all sorts of people are benefiting every time we do research. And it's interesting, we'll talk about this next week, but when we write the research proposal, one of the sections we have to think about is who are the beneficiaries. And it's easy to start with, well, if you pay the money, you're going to get the results. But you actually have to think about that. If a company does produce something more cheaply, okay, it might make them more profits, but it might also make that product cheaper to the consumer. So the whole of society benefits, because what we're buying we get more cheaply and so on. So when you think about the beneficiaries, if you actually open your mind, you find, well, actually, whatever we're doing, usually we can find quite a wide spectrum of society is benefiting from the results of this. Not directly through making more money, but because they've got a better product that they're working with, they've got a cheaper product that they're dealing with perhaps, and so on. So when we look at who are the beneficiaries of what we're doing, we can often find it's actually quite a wide sweep of people we can bring into that. Okay, so we've set up we've thought about the sort of research we do, we've thought about who's going to benefit from it, we've thought about why we do it, and we've thought about who are the participants. And essentially there's the funding body and there's the researchers. Okay, these are the two groups. What I want to look at now is, okay, that relationship between the funding body and the researchers, because that's the research relationship. You know, right from the beginning we have to have someone paying for it and someone doing it, and all the way through the person paying for it is interested in what's going on and so on. So let's just look at that relationship between these two bodies. Okay, so we've established that there's a problem that we are going to have to address, and there are these two people who are going to be engaged with addressing this problem. It depends a little bit on who identifies the problem. It might be me, the researcher. Okay, I might say, well, you know, from research I've done before, I realise that actually it's something we need to know more about. There's something we need to know more. So I've said, you know, the world, society needs to know more about this. So I've identified the problem. And if that's the case, I'm going to work up a proposal. I'm going to sit down and go, right, if I was going to address that problem, this is what I've got to do. We'll think about the details of what the proposal looks like next week, but I will work out, this is what we've got to do, this is how much money I'll need to do it, okay, this is the number of people, these are the resources I need, and so on. So I will work up the proposal. However, sometimes it's not the researchers who spot the problem, but the people who are going to pay for it, whether it be industry or the government. They say there's this problem here that we want to address. So they found a problem that they want to get sorted out, and they want to find some researchers to do it. So the funding body doesn't write the proposal because they can't. They don't know what needs to be done and how much it's going to cost. But they do write a call for proposals. They say, they define the problem. They say, this is the issue. Congestion or pollution on the roads. This is the problem, and we want someone to address this problem for us. So they write this call, which can be quite detailed about the nature and the elements of the problem and so on. So they will write a call, which researchers will respond to. Okay, so in this route, the researchers didn't identify the problem. They're busy getting on with it, but they look in the various places these are publishing. Oh, crikey! You know, the European Union is putting out a call. They want people to look into this. I could do that. I could do it really well. So we look at what their call is, and we now write the proposal. Well, if I was going to address this problem, this is how I would do it. This is how much money I would need. This is how much time I would need, and so on. So we write the project proposal. Clearly, we submit that project proposal, whether we'd done it off our own bat or whether we'd done it in response to a call. Either way that we got to that project proposal, we're now going to present it to the funding body. So we're going to say, look, here's a problem that you identified or we identified. This is the work that will solve it, and we'll put it to the funding bodies or body, and they will evaluate it. They'll have a look at it, decide whether they like it or not, and so on. If it was a call for proposals, that will probably be done competitively. So if they've put out a call for proposals, there won't be just one project proposal. I'll put in one. People from Holland will have put in one, people from America will have put in one, goodness knows what, okay? And so they'll look at these different ones and they'll evaluate them competitively and decide who it is that they want to go forward with and work with. So, having decided who they're going with, or if it was just us, they said, look, we want money to do this, here's a proposal, they'll look at it, evaluate it, and go, yeah, we could be involved in that, we'd like to put some money into that. So then there's going to be a negotiation between the funding body and the research body. Okay, so negotiation. And so this will actually, it will include refining the project proposal. So they might say, well, we like your proposal, but you're spending too much effort solving this part of the problem. We think this is more important. So there might be discussion around what actually is going to be done. They might say, we like it, but you're talking about 3 years over it. We need the result much sooner than that. We want this done within a year. Okay, so there might be discussion around time. There will obviously be discussion around what the funding level is going to be, how much money they're going to provide, what we're going to bring to the table, what they've got. They may already have data we can use, and so on. And at the end of that, there'll be a contract agreement. And so once the agreement is signed, we can start the research. Okay, so this is now back to the research side of the problem, the researchers' side of the partnership, and we're now going to start doing the research. So we do the research, but we don't just go right the way through down to the end and deliver the final report and other deliverables. Along the way, depending on how long it is, but along the way, the funding body is going to want to know how you're getting on. Is my money being well spent? what are the results? You know, have you got any problems and so on. So along the way, there's this process of monitoring what's going on through meetings and through reports. So the funders are going to be monitoring what we do. We provide them with regular reports. It will be agreed in the contract of these reports every 3 months or every 6 months or more often. So we'll provide them with reports, tell them how we're getting on, and we will also have meetings with them to actually show them how we're getting on and discuss what the issues are and so on. And we will think about this in a few 2 or 3 weeks' time. We'll think about what is the nature of that monitoring process. It may be that in the agreement some of the payments are dependent on these reports. Okay, so it might be, you know, they will pay in tranches of money, and they'll pay once we've got this report and have accepted it, then we'll pay the next stage payment. So that might be associated with that. Okay, and so we go on with that for whatever length of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, not usually much longer than that. And we produce our final report and pass it over to the funding body, and hopefully they accept it, and the job is done. Okay, so they asked us, we had a problem, we worked out a proposal, we found they put out a call, we put the proposal, they looked at it, we agreed it, we did the research, they monitored it on the way, we finished the research, we provided the final report, and they looked at it and they accepted it. So that's really the end of the research process, if you like. But it's not the end of what happens, because is this report embodying? It might not be a report, it might be an artifact, it might be a thing, a piece of equipment, a piece of software, who knows. But the final product from this, let's say deliverables, not just a report, but other deliverables perhaps. What this is, of course, is new knowledge. Okay, we've done the research and we've created new knowledge. So with this new knowledge, what are we going to do with it? And there's 2 things that we want to happen with that new knowledge. Okay, yeah, we're paid for what we've done. One thing is the exploitation. Okay, we've got new knowledge. How are we going to make the world a better place? How are we going to make money? How are we going to do something with this that is valuable in artists? So this is what we call the exploitation. So the exploitation of that new knowledge to improve things. And that will be done. The exploitation is done by the funding body. I mean, it may not be done by them directly, but they will find someone who's going to do it. If it's the industry, they do it themselves. If it's government, maybe they do it themselves. Maybe they pass that knowledge on to partners and so on. So that's the responsibility of the funding body. They may involve us in that exploitation. They may say, okay, we need to keep you as a sort of consultant to advise on as we turn this new knowledge. You know, we've done it in the lab, and they go, now we want to do it on an industrial scale, and we need to keep you involved. They may even ask for further research on that. But we may be involved in the exploitation, but it is driven by the funders. But what we are interested in is the dissemination. We've created new knowledge, and we want the world to know about that new knowledge. The way this boundary of knowledge extends is because we know what other people are doing and what other people have got to. We're not working in individual pools, so we need to put it out there so other people know what we've done and they can build on it. Of course, we're particularly interested in this because the dissemination, meaning publishing papers, okay, in journals and going to conferences and presenting, maybe writing books in some disciplines and so on. That is how we build our esteem. We've done all this lot, and remember, one of the motivations was to build our reputation and esteem. Well, that only happens if people know we've done it and know what a great job we've done. So at the end of the research, we researchers, have to go out, write papers, present it at conferences, tell people what we're doing, partly so the world knows, but partly so they know what we've done, and it was we who did it, and therefore we build up our esteem. So the 2 things that happen with that new knowledge are it should be exploited to make the world a better place, and it should be disseminated so other people know about it and can also use it. You know, other people can also exploit it. What I've described there, those standard interactions, it doesn't matter how big the project is, that relationship holds good, even if it's you for your. I mean, I've not put it on there. I've said an MPhil, £12,000, 18 months work or something, or an industry project, or a research council. You know, an industry-funded project might be £40,000 or £50,000 worth. A research council project might be £250,000 worth, something like that, or more, £500,000 worth, or an EU-funded project, 8 million or more, 15 million, 20 million, growing into a big program. Okay. So that pattern that I've just shown works, and in a way we can even, I'll just pop back to it, we can even make it think about it for you. You do have to identify a problem for your dissertation. You do have to write a proposal for what you're going to do. You have to find a funder, by which we mean the supervisor in this case, but you have to find someone who's going to support you in that supervising, monitor what you're doing. You will agree with them, they will look at your project proposal and make sure it's okay and maybe modify it a bit. You will then do the research, you will meet with your supervisor, okay, on a regular basis so they can monitor what you're doing. At the end of the day, you will submit your dissertation, your final report, which will be looked at by the examiners, okay, and then hopefully you will disseminate it. Some MSc projects are written up as conference papers or journal papers, so good ones are written up in that form, okay, so hopefully you will go on and disseminate it. Whether it's exploited or not is a bit more dubious, but if it's something that's really useful, it might be exploited. So even for what you're doing, that picture is valid. And the project proposal, of course, right at the beginning there, this is crucial to the success of it. It is important because that's how we're going to get the money. You can't just go into someone's office and say, I've got this problem that I think I can sort out. Would you like to give me £250,000 to work on it? Okay, so we need to put it down clearly if we're going to persuade anyone to actually put some money into the process. It defines what we're going to do. Why is this project going to be useful? It sets out how we're going to do it, what the methodology is, and over what period of time we're going to do it. It will have a risk assessment in it, and that risk assessment is not just, what are the dangers associated with it. That's partly, is this likely to succeed? All research is a plunge into an unknown area. So we have this timescale, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be what actually happens. When we start the research, we might discover something we hadn't anticipated, and we get pushed off course, and it's going to take longer. So there's an element of risk in any research, and so we need to be aware of that, and we will discuss how we deal with things when they do go wrong. When we think about that monitoring process, we have to justify the amount of money we need. Okay, what are the resources that we require, and justify that, and we have to indicate what the outcome of the research is going to be. Okay, are we going to just deliver a report, or are we going to deliver some software, or are we going to deliver a protocol, a procedure? What is it that we're actually going to deliver? Are we going to deliver a piece of equipment? Okay, and so on. And we also look at who is going to help, who are going to be the beneficiaries of this. And lastly, it must include what are the plans for the exploitation dissemination. Although those come after the research, it should be clear, okay, when this is all this is done, the funding body wants to know, have you got mechanisms in place to make sure that all this research isn't just wasted? If it's just going to be a report, what's going to happen to that report? Is it going to sit on the shelf and just stay there, sit as a file in someone's computer and never be looked at? Because if so, why on earth are we putting the money into this? So there've got to be clear dissemination routes, exploitation dissemination routes at that stage. So all of this is what's included in the proposal, and is justifying, really all of this is justifying why someone should put money into it. Okay then, so that's where we've got to today. We've thought about research projects in the wider context, thought about why we do research at all. We've identified the participants, funding people and researchers themselves, the problem solvers, and we've had a look at the interaction between these two, identifying the problem, working out a proposal, agreeing what the contract is, working out what the deliverables are, and so on. Okay, if everyone's comfortable with that, I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll see you again same time, same place next week, and we'll move on to think about the problem. Okay.
Yeah.